Hi, this is Mr. Cordes, and today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to talk about analytical paragraphs. Analytical paragraphs are a little bit different than body paragraphs that you are familiar with for writing an essay. Analytical paragraphs stand alone. And what happens is you specifically look at certain components of a passage or of a work, and instead of writing 3, 4, 5 pages about the subject, you are condensing items down to specifically look at certain details. Okay. Now, first and foremost, do not be overwhelmed. A majority of what you do in an analytical paragraph, you have done before in a basic paragraph. So let's review that real quick. In a basic paragraph, you can see here I have up over here, you would have certain components. Okay, a lot of times people think, oh, a paragraph is, 5 sentences, 6 sentences, 7 sentences, when in reality, there's certain components that go into it. So if you were to write 5 sentences of summary, that's not a body paragraph. That's a summary, which is kind of like a book report. 7th graders can do that. Us here at this level, high school level, we want to write an analytical paragraph. So you can see here, 1, 2, you would do this like twice. So 3, 4, 5. So if I have five sentences for this body paragraph, I've got a topic sentence, which introduced what's the paragraph about. I've got some sort of evidence from my story, a quote, concrete detail, textual evidence, something right there, something that is from what I'm studying, what I'm analyzing, okay? The commentary and analysis sentences, that's like the big chunk of it right there. That right there, ladies and gentlemen, is where you put your insight. What is it that you're actually talking about? So if you were looking at, let's say, the element of foreshadowing, in a story, the very first sentence would talk about what foreshadowing is, kind of give us an idea of the story and how it projects certain things that will come later. You would give me an example of a foreshadowing element from your story. And then here, the commentary analysis, these green sentences, that's where you actually begin to say, this is how this is used as foreshadowing. This is how that quote can be seen as telling us what will happen in the future, predicting, forecasting what will happen for us. And then you've got your last sentence kind of concludes the paragraph or transition. So a body paragraph is relatively simple, like here's your basic things set forth, and you kind of do that over and over in your essay writing. The big parts here that we're going to continue to use all of those, but for the analytical paragraph, you have additional items that help set apart what you're doing. So let me get set up here. What you've got going on, it says analytical paragraphs have certain components that quickly and concisely strengthen a literary discussion. Analytical paragraphs go into the piece of literature, pull it apart. They begin to analyze what's happening on a very a stronger, more thorough level. So this is like varsity. Okay, body paragraphs are like JV or freshman. Analytical paragraphs is like you are on varsity. You know what's going on. You're going to go to CI, like you are set and ready to go. Okay, so here it says analytical paragraphs have certain components that quickly and concisely strengthen the literary discussion. Quality paragraphs will be thorough, explaining and analyzing 2 things. Okay, we want to look for 2 items. What's the author's purpose? Okay, what is our author trying to tell us? And how do the literary elements are being conveyed? How do the literary elements, help convey that author's purpose, that author's message? Okay. So what this means is, first and foremost, you have to look for what the author wants readers to learn, understand, apply to their life. What is it in that passage, in that text, in that story, do our authors want us to get out from that? Okay. So there has to be something. What's the author really trying to convey to us readers? They're not just writing about, boys trapped on an island for Lord of the Flies. They're not really just talking about 2 guys who are farmers who want to buy their own land. Like there's something going on, and we have to figure out what's the message that's being relayed to us. Okay. The second part, after we determine what is our author trying to tell us, we have to figure out how are they telling us this message? Is it through foreshadowing? Is it through figurative language? Is it through the components of like the characters themselves, symbols? Is it dialogue? Like what is it that actually helps us get to understanding that point? Okay. So looking here, what I've done is I've created a checklist. And at any moment, if this gets overwhelming, pause the video. I've got an example that I will show you as well. But the very first thing, the very first two sentences actually more look like an introduction than anything else. You give me a sentence that explains the author, the title, and a general reference to the story. So, Lord of the Flies by William Golding is a story about boys stranded on an island. Done, that's it. Right? It's kind of like when you go to the movies with your friends and you're looking at the marquee trying to figure out what to watch. And so someone will say, oh, that movie was directed by this guy, and it's about these two guys who travel through time or whatever, right? You give them a general introduction without offering way too much, okay? The second part right here is the mini thesis. And I say mini thesis because you're not writing an entire essay, you're just writing a paragraph. So the mini thesis identifies the author's purpose and the literary elements that is used to communicate that purpose. So for those of you guys, we did a close reading passage on chapter 2 and the fire, and how the fire was taking on animal qualities, and how that showcased the shift in the boys trying to go from civilized, create rules, to kind of more chaotic savages. That's right there, first and foremost, the author's purpose. The author is trying to communicate that these boys are slowly losing civility and becoming these animals, right? And the literary element that he is using is personification. He's using that fire and describing it like an animal, right? The squirrel that scampered up in chapter 2. He's using personification to help communicate that these boys are becoming more animalistic. So right here, you will create a mini thesis statement. Now, as always, if you get stuck with a thesis statement, always use the phrase, the point I'm trying to prove, okay? Let me write it up over here so you guys can remember. For a thesis, so if that needs to become your go-to phrase, it can be. Okay, I know that was very far away. I'm sorry, and then you had to see the back of my head. Thesis, the point I'm trying to prove is. So the point I'm trying to prove is, you can use that as a sentence starter and delete it later. The point I'm trying to prove is the author's purpose, or the author or Golding want readers to know what? Okay. Through the use of, and then explain your literary element. So it's almost like I hate to say like a math problem, but you are adding these things together. The point I'm trying to prove is that the author wants us to realize what? Through the use of what literary element. So you kind of begin to piece this together. So what is the author's purpose? And what is that literary element that they're using to convey that message? Okay. So now here, from there, you begin to go into a transition sentence. So almost kind of like a topic sentence that would help you move down into, okay, we're going to look at chapter 2. Looking at chapter 2, we begin to see the boys trying to be rescued on the island, right? I'm using Lord of the Flies as an example. For this, if you're unfamiliar with what I'm talking about. Then you'll go in and you'll explain the literary element within the story. So you'll explain the idea of, oh, they're using personification here. They're using foreshadowing. They're using symbolism, okay? There's a lot of foreshadowing in Of Mice and Men. in the very first chapters as far as what will happen later. So John Steinbeck is using the idea that, these problems will continue, and he foreshadows them early on in the story. All right. So once you've offered that literary element, so whether it be personification, whether it be foreshadowing, symbolism, then you go ahead and you give a piece of textual evidence. So show me from the text where that is. Okay, show me what that looks like. All right. Then you move on to the analysis. What does that really mean? How and why is this important to the work? Why is the personification of the fire important overall? What is it that we are trying to understand? Why does John Steinbeck use foreshadowing? Why does William Golding use personification to describe a fire? So you explain how and why the element is used. Okay. Usually this is about 2 to 3 sentences. And then further explanation of the literary element, and then transition into the author's purpose. So if you transition, so foreshadowing is used by the author's name to convey what? Right? This is analytical paragraphs, ladies and gentlemen, is really just us helping to articulate the analysis that we see. Okay. I've talked about analysis before, where you pull things apart and understand how it works, but how it works for a bigger whole. Now you're describing, oh, this is how it all works. And this is why the engineer did it this way. So now you're taking an even bigger step in your analytical skills to say, look at these components, look at all these other things, and then you bring it back together. So you transition then from your elements. What is the element, and how does that relate to the author's purpose? So foreshadowing is used to help convey the message of, trouble, or staying out of trouble, or watching over your loved ones, whatever the case might be. And then once you've given that example of the author's purpose, you show an example. So you tell about it. Hey, this is what the author's purpose is. Then you go into, this is where I see it. This is where I see in chapter 2, the author's purpose of talking about the fire becoming a wildlife of its own, right? It has now grown out of control. So you have a sentence, 2 sentences explaining that. From there, you've got your analysis sentences that connect back to your thesis statement. Okay, so answer these questions. That's how simple this is. Explains what the author is doing and why. Identify the significance. Why is it important? And analyze what readers learn and why that's important. So it's not that you read a story and you're like, okay, that's a good story. What do you learn? What do you learn about human life? What do you learn about yourself? What do you learn about your relationships, right? Walking away from this book, I understood, oh, wow, it's really interesting to see that without rules, we quickly deteriorate as humans, right? Without enforcement, we get all upset, right? Like there's things in this book that you kind of have to connect to your own life. In any book that you would connect to your own life to say like, wow, what is our author really trying to say and communicate? Okay. The last part is where you explain the closing thoughts and the purpose, the author's purpose again. So you bring it on home. Now you'll kind of notice a pattern. Literary element. Okay. What's the literary element? What is an example of that literary element? Analyze it. Then you go on to the next. What is my author's purpose? An example of the author's purpose. Your analytical sentences that say, why is this author's purpose important, and how does that connect back to what I'm trying to prove? Okay, so kind of notice the pattern. Now, this is a much longer paragraph than the normal 5 that you would do for an essay. Okay, if you notice, there's another document that's attached as well. It is the analytical paragraph example. All right. Make sure you have this document up. This right here, ladies and gentlemen, what I've done is I numbered the sentences for you. So if you look down below, there is an analytical paragraph about John Steinbeck's short story, The Chrysanthemums. Okay. It's a short story. It's a great short story. If you have time to read it, go for it. But what I did was I documented each sentence with a number, and then you can find it down here. So if you've gone through this video and you're like, yeah, I have no idea what you're doing, I have no idea where to start with number 1. Introduction of title, author, and general reference to the story. In his short story, The Chrysanthemums, John Steinbeck uses the flower, uses this flower for both realistic and symbolic purposes. Done. I know who my author is. I know who the title is. And I have a general idea that he's using chrysanthemums, which is a type of flower, to have realistic and symbolic purposes. That's it. Very super straight to the point. Okay. Now, sentence number two is the mini thesis statement. So this identifies the author's purpose and the literary elements that are used to communicate. So coming down here, the chrysanthemums not only advance the plot by creating the story's central conflict, but also defies the character of Eliza, revealing the story's theme. Look at that. I have identified that not only do these flowers help move the story along, okay, towards the central conflict, but they also help define the character through the concept of theme. So my author is trying to relay, this is really what the character is, and this is how it relates to the bigger story. I'm going to use these flowers as symbolic gestures to communicate that. Okay. So sentence number 3 is a transition sentence to help create flow. Here's my third sentence. The chrysanthemums as a symbol are vital to Steinbeck's presentation of theme and character. Super simple. These items help convey the author's presentation of character and theme. So the idea here is that theme and character are part of my literary elements, right? The chrysanthemums as a symbol, that's my literary element. Okay, if you look up here, that literary element that needs to be used, explain the literary element, we've got the symbolic nature. Something represents something else, a symbol. Okay, so number 4, explanation of literary element within the story. So their function is to better understand Eliza's character. The chrysanthemums, okay, their function is to better understand Eliza's real character. That's how they help. Super straight to the point, right? Now I need a piece of textual evidence that helps relate to that. So at number 5, it says at the beginning of the story, Eliza is presented as a strong woman who is strong enough to break the back of a calf. Steinbeck writes, now notice how long my sentence number 5 is. I got a starting point, and then I actually go into the quote. So if you need to offer 2 sentences here, that's sufficient, and that will do well. Okay. For number 6, let's see here, is my analysis. This is the most important part. So for my analysis, I come down and I say, as Eliza is tending to the garden, the flower exemplifies her strong qualities, as well as her gentle beauty of femininity. So the flower that she's talking about here in the reference, right? The quote that I just had, how does that translate to her as a character? If we know that John Steinbeck is saying that the chrysanthemums represent her character, I'm now explaining, here's how they connect. They show her strong ability. They show her strong qualities of strength, as well as the gentle beauty of femininity. So these are very good, beautiful flowers, but they're very strong, right? It talks about them being worked over with scissors, right? As she's in there gardening, okay? Notice I've got a second sentence here. Whoops. Notice I've got a second sentence right here that is part of my analysis. She regards herself as strong, as does her husband, and readers clearly see her positive qualities and characteristics. We see them because of the way she's acting, and I have to articulate that, all right? At the end of the story, Eliza is seen huddling and fragile. So right here, number 7, if I look at number 7, further explanation of the literary element, and I'm transitioning. So notice that I've already stated that John Steinbeck is trying to convey the true character. Yes, she is beautiful and strong, but she's also very frail at the same time. So coming down here, the newly revealed Eliza is not the strong woman that she or her husband thought she was. The story ends with the following line. So now I'm helping transition. So yes, she's strong, but there's also a weak side as well. And let's show that, because that creates a round character, just like the flowers. Very beautiful, very strong, but they also have their downsides as well. So sentence number 8 is my piece of textual evidence. I offered like, hey, she's strong, but she also has a moment of vulnerability. and then I go down into number 8, right? Number 8 right here is the newly revived is strong, but she's not as strong as she thought she was. The story ends with the following line. Here I've got my textual evidence, okay, about her crying weakly, okay? Number 9, if we look at number 9, these are my analysis sentences again, okay? And then number 10 explains the author's purpose, making a connection, making them all connect together at the very end. So number 9, like most people, she is deluded about her emotional strength. It wasn't until Eliza saw the plant start to the side of the road and she felt the sting of the rejection and isolation. So she's feeling this. Okay. Number 10. So here's where I drive it home. I make the connection. Steinbeck illustrates such powerful and relatable themes for readers. Strength and weakness. We've all been there before in whatever capacity. Some moments you feel like, yeah, I've got this. This is going to be good. And then other moments you're like, oh my gosh, I have no idea what's happening. Okay. Eliza's gardening and the chrysanthemums symbolize her protection. She wants to protect herself. That's why they're inside the gate. That's why they're inside. So when one of them goes, is damaged, she's completely upset, and because she can be damaged as well. Readers connect to the loneliness, isolation, and feelings of inadequacy that such symbols embody and reject. So we connect. The author wants us to connect with the fact that she is strong, but then weak at the same time. And he uses these flowers as a symbol to relate that message. So when you are looking at your own writing, the easiest way to go through this is to go off the checklist. You have a blank checklist here, okay? Check, 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 check. And what you could simply do is identify, if you want to identify them as numbers, like I have done on this side, you can do that as well. So let me get my intro sentence. Let me get my second sentence. If going down this checklist is almost too structured for you and you just need to pull back, grab a piece of paper and start writing, go for it. And then what you can do is go, okay, I need to find my explanation of the literary element. Okay, this would be my number 4, and you can mark it down. Your goal, ladies and gentlemen, is to discuss the author's purpose. What is that literary element in a in-depth, detailed, concise way? Okay, we are going to be practicing analytical paragraphs throughout this unit. We're going to be using these as we continue into more in-depth writing. So instead of doing a gigantic 3-page essay, we are just doing an analytical paragraph. So you can see here, you've got at least 10 types of sentences. I think if I add up this, it's 14 altogether, because you've got a couple of marks that have multiple sentences. So yeah, I know that's a lot. I know that's overwhelming. Start by drafting your work and then going through and identifying the different components in each, okay? Email me, talk to me if you have any questions or concerns, message me. We'll get through this together, but we need to make sure that we have all of these components for an analytical paragraph, okay? This is actually what I use to grade. I go through and I say, okay, do they have an introduction sentence? Check. Do they have a mini thesis? Yes. Do they have analytical sentences that explain how and why? Yes. So go through, use these almost as prompts to help you as you go through your writing, okay? If you have questions or concerns, send me a message. We'll get through this. You're going to be applying this to the story that we're reading and to the prompts. So the preliminary work that you already did is now being put into action so that you can showcase what you know and how well you analyze, okay? Send me a message if you need to. Talk to you guys later. Bye.